Assalamualaikum everybody, and thank you very much for joining us today for this webinar that's based on navigating ESG regulatory mandates and requirements for the banking industry specifically. And the regions under focus are Pakistan, UAE, and Saudi Arabia. The session is organized by Sustainability and Nets International in collaboration with the University of Lahore under their project Continuum. My name is Hina Nasir, and I'm a partner at Sustainability, and I'll be your host for the next 1 hour to drive this conversation. But before we dive into the conversation, just a quick couple of house rules. Everybody has been muted at the time of entrance. Please keep yourself at mute. If you have any comments, please use the comment section and the question and answer session for any questions for the panelists. We have already allocated around 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the session where we'll pick up your questions and deliberate on them also. Now, just to introduce our panelists, we have 𝗲𝗂𝘀, who is a partner at Sustainability. We have 𝗪𝗵𝘁. He's a partner at 𝘂𝗶𝘁, and we have 𝗪𝗵𝘁, who is representing Nets International. He's a CFO there. So thank you very much, 𝗪𝗵𝘁 and 𝗂𝗶𝘁, for joining us today and for taking time out for this session. To formally kick off this session, I'd like to request 𝗲𝗂𝘀 to build a little context for our audience around what's really happening in the banking sector in relation to ESG and sustainability. And again, we talked about UAE, Saudi, and Pakistan markets in specific.
Thank you, Hina, and very good afternoon to all the participants who have joined us from different part of the world. So just to set the context, I'll take 10 minutes to give you a rundown what's happening in the banking sector in Pakistan, Saudi, and UAE. So first thing we need to understand, there's a global shift. So there was a journey which started, and there's an evolution which started with the certain ESG guidelines, SDGs, TCFD alignments, and those were the voluntary principles, but does not have any enforcement earlier. And then in a recent past, we have seen a central bank coming up with the mandatory guidelines, regulations, rules, framework, and the binding circular, which is creating a reporting obligation as well as the monitoring obligation, specifically with the climate-related financial risk embedded within the portfolio as well as within their own operations. And then there's a prudential regulation changes which happen in a recent past in terms of the rules as well as, again, the frameworks and the guidelines, which is also carrying penalties if there's a non-compliance or a breach of compliance. And the capital advocacy remain one of a central key point in terms of the risk assessment and evaluating how sound the financial system or the financial institution is in general. So just to give you the background on the Pakistan, the central bank came up with a very structured and phased approach. It started with the green banking back in 2017, evolved to ESRM framework, which was for environment and social risk management framework of IFC. Then we have got Pakistan Green Taxonomy, which is objectively defining the criteria for certain economic activities, as well as some cross-cutting functions within the economies that how to really evaluate whether the activity was green or not. So that's a very objective criteria. At the same time, climate risk framework was introduced, and there is a full compliance which is required by 30th June 29, but there's a board approved plan which has to be submitted by 30th June 2026. In addition to that, there's a climate stress testing which is happening as we speak. And in Pakistan, State Bank has selected 6 banks to start implementing PGT, Pakistan Green Taxonomy, on a selected clients and start understanding the risks as well as qualifying them for their green activities. So this is already in play, although it's not mandatory right now, but the State Bank has already started working towards that. If you look at the UAE central bank regulation, a very recent one, again, it's related with the climate-related financial risk management, which is generally known as a law, the Decree 8, Circular 8/25. So that's one of an area which is, again, mandating banks to evaluate their capital adequacy, solvency, recovery planning, and the risk around the climate side. Not only their own risk, but the risk which is within their portfolio. That's mean where the borrower also carrying certain risk, and if they are funding the sector which are heavily emitting carbon. And then there is a federal decree law, which is again require a implementation by 16 September, which requires a mandatory compliance and carry a significant penalties. As an institution, it goes up to the 1 billion, and for individual, it's like a 5 million AET. If you look at Saudi does not have such a strict regulation yet, but their overall vision and the Green Initiative started in 2021, already defining the national policy and the direction. There is a certain regulation which is coming from a capital market authority specifically for social or sustainability related or green bond issuance. Then Tadawul, their stock exchange, has already mandated a certain disclosures on the ESG, and Ministry of Finance itself, when they are going for their own green bonds or Sukuk issuance, so that's also require a certain green financing framework which was introduced earlier. But we do expect the Saudi will be going in a similar direction the way UAE is, and we are expecting that there will be certain decree directives and circulars which will be mandating the climate risk assessment as a one of a compliance requirement for the banks going forward. Why it's important, why we are discussing bank and we are not discussing other industry, or why we are discussing the financial services in particularly. When we look at the financial services and the bank, so we call it a transmission mechanism. So these are the way they will define their climate risk, that will define how the capital will be flowing across the economy, whether we are talking about public sector, government, corporate investor, the way they are going to raise money, the way they are going to deploy money in a private sector, or the way the capital market will be responding, because capital market also need the institutional investment, which again have a certain, the banks have got a certain stake or influence within those decisions. And then there's a regulator and the supervisors like central banks who have to really make sure, and the corporate regulator who have to make sure the rest of the institutions like the non-banking institution or non-financial sector, they are ready with the disclosure to provide that information based on which banks will be making decisions. And there's a term which we normally use is a brown risk or a downside, which we will see that. So there's a physical risk exposure or a transition risk exposure, which is which exists within the economy. And then there's a green solution related to that. So banks are moving more towards investing in the solutions which are greener as compared to what we are using today, or a transition plan which leads towards the low carbon economies and create a more climate resilient economic structures within the country. So banks are going to act as one of a pivotal role and define that how the capital flow will be capital flow go to the different actors or a borrower going forward. And in Pakistan and UAE, we have already seen the stringent regulations which are defining the capital flows. And Saudi, we are seeing that it's coming up. There's a lot of conversation happening. It's just a matter of time that when they will bring it in as a law or as a circular. So I think today's conversation will be evolving around these contexts and the themes that what signals we are seeing there from a banking sector and how it's going to impact the banks as institutions, financial services in general, and the borrowers, which are whether a private sector or a public sector, how it's going to impact them to access the capital. So over to you, Hina. We can take it forward from there as a discussion.
Thank you, Sujit. I think it was very important to set the context right in terms of the market and the regulatory landscape, which has been shifting from the voluntary to mandatory side. I hope it was very useful for everybody. Before we move on to the next question, just want to remind everyone to please drop in your questions or comments in the comments and question answer sections, and we will pick it up as we go further. Aleem, if I can come to you. We understand that frameworks like IFRS S1 and S2 are forcing banks to treat sustainability data with exact same rigor and accuracy like audit reports or financial records, if you can say. Between the Pakistan and UAE strict deadlines and the State Bank ESRM manual also, what structural adjustments compliance teams need to make to handle these reporting standards?
Thank you, 𝗀𝗍𝗓, and thank you for the organizers of this conversation. And these conversations are very important with the changing circumstances and the challenges we are facing with the climate change. And I am speaking to you from Punjab, being in central Punjab. We face the challenges of climate change every day here in Pakistan. So whatever we can do about it through these conversations and through corporate measures is really valuable. So coming to the question regarding the regulation and how the frameworks are evolving, as Sajid quickly summed up the regulations that are there in the banking sector. There were some, as Sajid said, some voluntary frameworks which are being followed by the banks over the years, and the various initiatives by the central banks of each jurisdiction. Now they are being converged through formal reporting mechanisms. So S1, S2 in UAE, the timeline for readiness is there. In Pakistan, the Security and Exchange Commission (SEC) has mandated the applicability on large listed companies, all large listed companies, and banks. Most of the large banks are listed organizations in Pakistan. So the first year of implementation of IFRS S1, S2 is this year, the year which we are living in, from January 1, 2026. And this mandate, although it has some transitional provisions that the first year will not be subject to audits, and some scope 3 emissions would not be required to be disclosed in the first year, but the readiness for reporting all those initiatives which are being implemented by the banks through the various measures over the years, consolidating them in such a manner that they can be disclosed to public in a sustainability report, is going to be a major change for the financial institutions and for an important pieces of information for the stakeholders. So a quick roundup of these regulations. S1, S2 has inherited the 4-pillar disclosure mechanism from TCFD, being governance, strategy, risk management, and the matrices and targets. So it is all encompassing. So the State Bank's current regulations, the circulars, the plan that needs to be submitted by the banks by September is revolving around those as well. The corporate governance regulations have evolved accordingly as well. So for banks to be able to understand where they are right now as part of working on various different frameworks in the past, they need to know where they stand right now. So one of the initial initiatives which I believe many of the banks would already be working on is to know where you are, call it a current state assessment, call it a gap assessment, but do it quickly with a time-based mandate, maybe 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, but you don't have much more time than that. And after that, since these frameworks require the strategy to be devised and disclosed in the reports, the governance structure has to be put in place and has to be reported to the shareholder as well. So all these things are not merely some reporting items which can be gathered by some financial reporting or risk compliance people. They need buy-in from the governors, from the directors, from the senior management, and at the core of it, the people running the business, the people who are giving out those loans, need to think about the strategies moving forward. So action item number 2 should be to build your capacity, to educate everyone in your organization, from the business side, from risk, from compliance, from reporting. And since these information are going to be audited eventually, the second year of a reporting will be subject to external assurance as well. Assurance readiness is also essential. So internal audit departments also need to be geared up, and their capacity needs to be built up. And finally, to close my conversation, we need to build those points, those implementation strategies where we can collect the right data, the internal data and the data that is coming, that is going to be collected from the customer. So starting from the customer due diligence and then the continuous need of data to be able to assess how our portfolio is emitting, how it's doing in terms of its emissions. It's going to be a large set of data, and the quality of data is going to be critical. So the banks moving forward will have to include the quality of data that an organization can provide into the pricing mechanisms as well. So
Absolutely.
current state assessment, build capacity, and start getting up to collect data.
Okay, perfect. Aleem, there were a couple of points that you mentioned that I've written down. One is governance and the other is capacity building. These are two of the points, at least, that I would like to come back to you and Sajid later in the conversation, and we would like to deliberate a little more on this. For now, Shahir, if I come to you, one other thing that Aleem mentioned was data. So now that central banks want hard carbon data, so I'm asking you from a CFO's perspective right now, because you guys are dealing with a lot of financing that's happening all around.
Yeah.
Overhauling core banking legacy platforms to capture this all data is an absolute budgeting nightmare, probably. How can a bank's finance department structure its sustainability infrastructure investments to get all this auditable data?
So for finance and CFO point of view, budgeting for a capex expenditure is in itself a challenge that you have to manage. For regulatory requirement, you have to put in a lot of effort to make sure that everything comes in place, because ultimately you are being judged or being governed by the regulations. So putting all cost and capex expenditure will be a challenge, as well as the may pose risk to your core banking system. So for my understanding, it should be in a phased manner. Maybe a middleware layer to be incorporated into the system, so that from where you capture the data from, like some energy emission portal, where your customers can put in the data and you can gather the data, scrutinize it, and manage it. And on the other hand, what I see that the another model that can be incorporated in the system is software as a service or a cloud-based ESG tools that can be integrated through APIs or any other form that can help us in this whole system. So that will eventually help us how our audit trails can be managed, or how eventually leading to the last data that has been uploaded by the customer. So this is my perspective. Putting a whole lot of funds into the capex creates two problems as to how to manage the legacy data and how to create the new data requirements. So that can be managed into a phase where we have to go to the eventually 100% compliance phase. So we can start from the day one to have software systems as well as middleware, so where we can start the system and manage it.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Shahir. I think getting the data or capturing your baseline or as a situation is has to be the starting point. And you mentioned a very
Yeah.
relevant point about integrating an external API or technology that helps you
Yeah.
do the carbon calculation. That simplifies a lot of things that are available out there. Sajid, if I can come back to you, uh, you interact with boards every day. Do you still see boards treating sustainability as a secondary agenda, or it has gone somewhere on the top? And also, like I mentioned, Aleem picked two very important areas: governance and capacity building. What role do you think these two areas play in for the banking sector, and how important are they?
I think the first segregation or distinction we have to create is that the sustainability reporting of a bank as a whole, which include a certain component of financed emission, but I'll come to that later. But the second most important one is the compliance requirement, very specific, objective, defined with the deadline, the compliance requirements which are coming from the central bank. Those are not the reporting requirements, right? So those are not that just disclose and go away with that. So those are the one which requires, number one, to evaluate the risk embedded within the portfolios in terms of the climate, right? So if we talk about the board are very much serious and very much involved in the compliance side of it. So that's where they are very much there. They have created the specific committees. They have created the management committees as well, as we see in UAE and Pakistan specifically. They have created the green officer, which is a requirement for the from the bank side, from a central bank side. They have done their capacity building session for the board, for the committees, for the senior management, as well as they are going towards the frontline. So this is a one side of it, where how the boards are looking at it. So from a governance perspective, we are seeing very strong involvement of board and the board committees in managing that the climate related risk embedded within the portfolio. Second part comes from the every transaction which now need to be processed, like every new loan or a renewal, which need to be processed with the ESRM or environment or social risk lens. And then there has to be a corrective actions around it. So that's mean there is an additional training and involvement in terms of how the entire process of borrowing or lending is going to change, because banks also lend to each other as well. So whether it's an institutional lending, or now we are seeing a more consumer related products like the green home loan, the green loans for the appliances as well, and the motor vehicle related green loans, and for the solar panel we are seeing the green loans. In UAE also there is a certain incentive. If you are going for a solar energy or a clean energy, the loans are on a cheaper rate. So that's mean the banks have also sacrificing their certain income to promote the green lending. And that's mean the overall strategy. Now we come to that part. The overall strategy of the lending and the investment, what we call in the bank side. So the entire asset side of the bank is need to be reevaluated with a different lens. And that's a huge task. And then we come to the portfolio analysis, particularly what we were talking about from a stress testing perspective. What is the exposure of the bank if the climate scenario changes? So NGFS has already defined the climate scenarios, and that is being used as a stress testing to see what is the exposure. And if there is an exposure, that's mean there will be a call for capital. That's mean in the books that exposure need to be provisioned. So it has to be provided, which will directly implicate that whether your capital is adequate to cover those risks, or there is a capital call going to the shareholder. So the compliances which are being mandated by the central bank, they are way stricter as compared to the IFRS S1 and S2 reporting requirement. Being an institution, IFRS S1, S2 reporting is for everybody. It's not only for the banks, but the compliance requirement coming from the central bank is for the banks only, and where they are investing. So they have to look at those portfolio and some level of compliances they have to do to really access that capital. So the biggest challenge, like Aleem mentioned, is the data. Whether the borrower is able to provide that data, and to enable that, there is a certain requirement by in Pakistan 𝘂𝗍𝑐𝗶, and then there is a certain law which is in UAE, which requires the non-financial institution to start disclosing their sustainability efforts, or start disclosing their generating the sustainability report, so the bank can rely on the assured data when they are evaluating their portfolio risk. Because if the borrowers are unable to provide that information, the banks can't do anything. They will start getting into the breach. They can't go back and tell central bank, we asked the client and it's not providing us any information. They have to call off the loan, or they cannot lend or extend the loan because there's a breach. So that's the implication for the banks and the rest of the economy. So IFRS S1, S2 is an enabler, or any sustainability related disclosures are the enabler for financial and non-financial institution to evaluate and provide the right kind of credible data. And for the banking sector, or for that matter, insurance sector in UAE as well, there is a requirement they can absorb that data, use that information, and create their risk models, which can incorporate climate-related risk assessment within that.
Right. Sujit, I think that clarification really helped. Right before the session, me and Aleem were having the same discussion And that your details that you shared absolutely covers everything. Ali, my next question from you was already related to the credit portfolios, but Mohammed Arshad, one of the participants, have asked a question that is very closely linked to what we wanted to get into. He's saying, how can banks integrate ESG factors into credit appraisal and lending decisions without significantly increasing the transaction costs?
Thank you, and this is among the various huge challenges that the banks are going to face, particularly in an economy like Pakistan, as the data challenges would always be there. There'll be additional costs for the bank for the purpose of obtaining the data, as well as letting go of certain portfolio due to these limitations that they are going to face. And Sajid has very rightly said that any sustainability reporting or public reporting is not the answer, but it is an enabler which motivates people to do things in a certain way which can be disclosed to the general public as well. So when it comes to obtaining that data, that it will be a challenge. There will be costs involved, and from the various perspective that they are used in the industry and in other sectors as well. The ideal scenario, as mentioned by Sajid, is that the banks would love to have the assured, verified information from their clients. But below that, if that's ranked number one, there are various levels of information that can be made available by the clients, and the least level is using the sector-based averages to get somewhere. But that also needs to be reported as part of your reporting to the central bank or public reporting, the level of estimations that have been used. But we will have to start somewhere. And one of the questions that was there was if the banks are generally ready for it. And Sajid also already touched upon it, the structures that have been put in place in banks already through the governance structures and the green banking offices and the certain trainings under IFC mandate and otherwise which have been conducted. The banks do have a platform available to them right now due to the efforts that have been going on for the past decade, almost a decade now. So banks will have to follow certain compliance deadlines now, and the push of those compliance deadlines will become the catalyst for the change in the portfolio in the coming days. And the change in portfolio, as being a reporting guy, I would also like to add that the impact on the portfolio of these climate factors would come on the financial statements of the bank through the credit loss models as well. The IFRS 9 expected credit loss models would have to incorporate the climate risks in the forward-looking scenarios as well. So definitely the impact on the asset side and the corresponding impact on the capital of the bank would need to be determined and incorporated in the financial statements moving forward. So based on all this, based on all these requirements, changes will have to be made in the strategy and in the reporting systems, both financial reporting and climate reporting.
Right. Aleem, thank you very much. And I thank you for picking up two questions for me from the audience. It kind of feels like a burden on me while there are still questions lying out there and I need to pick them up. So that's a double tick. I'll come back to you, Shahir. We picked up on data. And I think whenever anybody's talking about data, we talk about data integrity as a very big problem. You must have noticed that both me and Sajid, the organization that we did present, it's called sustainability, where we have replaced the B with D with the same focus in mind that, without data, you can't proceed with anything. So Shahid, we were talking about sustainability linked loans. So if a bank issues a sustainability linked loan and it turns out that borrower misrepresented their data or any of the metrics, the bank basically, that means faces penalties or investor lawsuit and reputational damage. From a financial controller's point of view, how do you set up an internal audit system in a way that you can legally protect the your own reputation and balance sheet as well?
Yes, thank you. What 𝗀𝗵𝘁 said, in continuation to that, everything starts from how you take data and incorporate into the system. For my understanding, everything that starts with the any loan or any transaction that is related to the green side, that should start from the KYC. That the KYC data should be smart enough so that we can integrate into a AI-based or automation-based system where everything can be studied and accordingly discussed with that. So automation into the financial data that is totally linked into your loan agreements, including the timelines and how those KPIs can be met. And the total transaction should be dealt into tranches in which you can say next tranche or KPI base should be given to the customers. In case there is a change, then you can penalize or incentivize those customers. Additionally, we have to manage for our internal scrutiny. We have to manage into GL level based reporting, where every green side data should be separately recorded, including all the proceeds and utilization and the balances. And last but not the least, the specifically related to ESG, the carbon emission reports and utility reports and the green certificates, including the environmental certificates, should be scrutinized so as to make sure that every data in the system has been fully met. So for my perspective, these 2-3 things, if we can integrate into a system and we can manage through automation-led management with the less human efforts, we can manage it. So this is a brief side from CFO's perspective.
Right. Sh@ʔ, thank you very much for that. There are a couple of more questions that I had lined up for all of you guys, but the conversation that's happening in the question answer section is, I think, is in a direction that where a lot of people are actually asking those questions from a place of, a pain point that they have seen. Like, for instance, one of the questions referred by Mr. Just give me a second. Okay, so sorry, by Ms. 𝗲𝗂𝗫. She's asking, do stricter ESG disclosure requirement create barrier for businesses in developing countries, or do they unlock opportunities for growth, investment, and international trade? Additionally, how can companies effectively integrate double materiality into supply chain traceability and decision making? Sujit, you can pick up that question, or Aleem.
Yep. So I think the first thing is number one, ESG disclosure is not the compliance requirement, right? So it's not saying that you have to change something within your supply chain today. The disclosure is all about to make sure that you measure something, how the operations are being run today, and what are your plan to transition from a current state to the newer state. And then there is a certain timeline, 2030, 2035. I have seen in China, it's 2071 for one of our organizations. So there has to be a plan around it. So the disclosure is basically informing the primary user. If we look at from a financial materiality perspective, the primary user is your lender, investor, and creditors to make informed decision about what kind of risk they are going to evaluate the risk, and then they can make their decision about their investment. So disclosures help the primary user to understand those risks, which are now the climate risk is a financial risk as we speak today. So they can understand the risk better. So that's the disclosure side. Now, the transition side, that's where the investment come into play, that how you will move from your current state to the new state. So there has to be a business case. Let's say if we talk about UAE, we talk about Turkey, we talk about Pakistan, we talk about any country which is engaged in an export to Europe. So the CBAM regulations are already there, and certain industries are already part of that CBAM. And going forward, there are new industries which will be added later. So if you are not transitioning towards the greener supply chain or moving toward a more sustainable operations, that's when you are going to lose the business which is coming from Europe. So from an opportunity perspective or retaining your current customer, it's important, it's imperative that you start working towards the sustainable operations, number one. Number two, as soon as you move towards the ESG aligned operation or a greener operation, the first thing you get as an outcome is a lower cost because you are removing a waste, whether it's energy, whether it's a productivity, whether we are talking about the electricity side of it or a material side of it. So everything, whatever we pick up, that will help us to reduce the cost and adds directly towards the bottom line. And that's why ESG, if we look on a longer term, that basically adding more value in terms of the business goal. Immediate value, near-term value is the reduction of the cost. So that's an immediate one, retention of the customers. That's a second one. And then having a more opportunity to the new market if you get ready before the other people or other organization get ready. So that's the business goals alignment. Number two, these requirements are not implemented to small enterprises on a day one. It starts with like Aleem also mentioned, it starts with the large organization. When the large organization start working on that, then it will have an impact in the entire value chain. And the large organization also invest with those value chain partners who are aligned and willing to go on that journey. So that will give more opportunity to the SME sector, which is a part of a value chain. From a small organization perspective, the impact might come in 3 to 5 years, how they should be working and what changes they have to make. But they have got time. They can start now and become a part of a larger organization value chain and really monetize their effort or intent. I would say at this stage, it's the intent which is more important. But definitely whether it will carry effort and investment, maybe slightly, but can it help you to avoid a bigger risk? Definitely. Like there was a question around bank has to incur additional cost in terms of collecting data and evaluating their portfolio. But we have to understand globally when the financial system goes down, the entire economy, global economy goes down. That's why there's a concept of systemic importance banks, that large banks should do everything first because they are the biggest risk. We talked about the IFRS 9 earlier as well. Any exposure which exists out there that directly impact the balance sheet and the equity requirements. So those risks need to be identified and managed today. And the banks have heavily funded the oil and gas industry. They have funded the coal energy plants as well. A small change in the laws will start making those operations or industries questionable in terms of their continuity. That means that is the biggest exposure banks are carrying on in their balance sheet. So if it's not systematically managed, it's not about the cost they are incurring. It's the level of risk they are going to avoid because the quantum of risk is so high. The cost to manage that risk is very small compared to that.
Thank you very much, Sujit, for that. Earlier on, we were talking about capacity building, and there's a question linked to that. It says, do we have regulator in Pakistan for ESG? That's first part of the question. And who will train the board and executives in these matters? Can you name any current companies so we can leave the last part out? But I think capacity building is one of a key issue that we have seen in various conversations also. It's not just at the board level, but when we are talking about a change this significant or a transition, that means you need a whole machinery from top executives to the lowest level of management that is working in this whole domain. So what is the current skill set that is available in the market? What are the gaps? And how do we transition the board to be enabled and trained to this level where they can take these decisions and move forward with this? Aleem, you can pick this question.
Sure. Thank you. So there have been initiatives in the banking sector led by the central bank, supported by the IFC in the past few years, where they have worked on capacity building of the personnel from across banking industry, and the awareness that is there in the banking industry, that some effort has gone into that. However, this topic is not only a huge topic, but the certain areas of this whole scenario is quite technical as well. So the need for capacity building would remain to be there. And there are certain internal corporate governance structures which require each organization, each bank to arrange for the capacity building of their board of directors, of their senior management. So the initiative would come from the regulators as well as encouragement for the organization to work on their capacity building themselves as well. And there was another question about what the government in general is doing about it. There is definitely a lot more that can be done by the regulators, by the government. But these conversations, this session that we are having, as responsible organizations, as responsible citizens, all these efforts also count in terms of building capacity and realizing the importance of these matters. And just to the previous answer by Sajid was a well-rounded answer. I just wanted to add one anecdotal thing about it, that whenever you can look across the frameworks around climate and sustainability risks, they always say the whole term risk and opportunities. So we must always realize that there are opportunities available, and for a nation like ours, which is a developing nation, getting into this habit is going to create more opportunities for us than our troubles that we will have to go through in achieving this. So we must remain optimistic, and we've got examples, as Sajid was mentioning, that the value chain, as a response to a large corporate or a large organization, the supply chain, the value chain eventually develops themselves. And in Pakistan as well, the export-led industries have been ahead of the curves because of their value chain, because they have to sell to Europe or Western countries. Similarly, the banks can be a lever, a catalyst for the change, wherein the small and medium enterprises, first the large corporates, and then in the coming days, the small and medium enterprises will also lift themselves up, and we will be able to achieve these targets, hopefully.
Absolutely, Aleem. It has to be a trickle-down effect, starting from the bigger organization and leading all the way to the smaller partners and supply chain partners. Dr. Mubashira has asked, are there regulatory incentives for green lending, sustainable finance products, or transition finance? Sajid.
It has got two different components to it. So the one component, when we talk about from a commercial bank perspective, so the best example is coming from UAE. They have set aside a 1 trillion dirham as a part of their sustainable or green finance portfolios, out of which I think by 25 they have already dispersed $10 billion worth of loans, and it has got a very specific clauses that if the borrower, if they achieve their goals, sustainability linked goals, so they get a certain level of discount, which can be anywhere between 25.25% to 1.5%. That's the range which they operate, depend on the size of the loan and the borrower as well. So there is a certain incentive which is linked there. So that's a one side of it. The second side of it, if we are into the projects which requires a transition finance, there is a whole lot of the climate funding which is linked there. So the climate related funding coming from the GCF in countries, we have also seen in a public-private partnership, there is a concept of viability gap funding as well, which is a low-cost one. Climate funding is also very low-cost one. It's a 1 to 2%. So when you blend the financing for the transition with the commercial and these concessional loans, so definitely you blend it in a way where it makes more sense and you get a cheaper loan. So that's a one of our incentive. And there's a financial instruments which are also helping to structure the blended finance in a way where the first loss can be absorbed by a one party, where there's a different level of like there's a different structures within the overall blended finance in a structured finance way, where people different actors can have a different level of recourse, as well as the low cost funding as a overall blend. So yes, there is a certain financing and a financial instruments which are available to fund that one. KSA is also doing that. UAE, we are seeing that kind of funding as well. In Pakistan, we are also seeing that kind of funding and the structures which are coming up. But that require the project need to be climate focused, whether it's mitigation, adaptation, or resilience side of it. Number one, it should have a MRV, like the measurable, reportable, and verifiable data. Data is one of our key. Without MRV, that doesn't work. And then there has to be a third party which can provide assurance in terms of all the information flow is right. So yeah, the short answer is yes, but there's a mechanism which is involved.
Thank you, 𝘊𝘂𝗿. Dr. 𝘊𝗵𝘁, I hope that answers your question. Our next question is from 𝘂𝗶𝘁𝗵𝘁. She's asking, what specific climate scenarios are banks expected to model against? And how are they expected to quantify transition risk on their fossil fuel heavy corporate loan books, where scope 3 data from borrowers simply does not exist yet?
I think the scenario I can mention 𝗳𝗶𝘃. So that's one of a globally defined scenario for the financial institution. For the transition risk assessment, that's a separate conversation that will require another hour to really evaluate how it's being assessed and incorporated. Sorry, Aleem, I just jumped on that.
I was going to speak on the same lines that 𝗳𝗶𝘃 has defined certain methodology which can be followed. And for example, in Pakistan, you mentioned in the beginning, 𝘊𝘂𝗍, that certain scenarios have been rolled out by the State Bank, and the banks are already working on it, and they'll be completing their first compliance in the third quarter of this year. So, the regulation, the methodologies are already there. There are going to be data challenges, but there are solutions to that as well. And these things would be transitioned into a maturity. So we will start from within the limitations that the industry and the banks have, but the frameworks are there. And the data coming out from even the local agencies, the State Bank has leaned on the data by the National Disaster Management geospatial analysis that has been done. So the data, whether the quality is ideal right now, is another question. But for now, there is a framework available, which is a starting point, and the banks will start complying with it within this year, actually. So, and the challenges of the data, we've already discussed the second part of that question.
All right, thank you. So did you want to add something on top of this, or?
No, I think that's quite comprehensive. So yeah.
Okay.
So we have seen the journey. We will see another journey. I think the banks have gone. The most difficult journey was the IFRS 9 adoption, and I think that's if we can do that even in the phases. So I think here we are seeing a good support system which is available to help banks go through that transition.
Done. The next question is from Mr. 𝗲𝗓𝗁. He's saying, for example, if commercial banking loans are not approved due to sustainability regulations, would they be able to get loan on a higher rate, or they won't be able to get any loan approved? I think we were talking about the sustainability borrowing scenarios. And second part of the question is, secondly, public listed companies would be able to secure capital investment through private equity investors, or it will also impact their public listing, goodwill? I mean, will the information of the denial would be disclosed to general public?
So from a banking perspective, number one, the information is never disclosed to the general public. So that's basically between the banks and the borrower. Your question whether from a sustainability perspective or a non-compliance towards the sustainability, whether that will end up as a denial or there will be a higher rate. So I think there are a couple of scenarios. Again, if you look at the UAE and KSA, and even in Pakistan, there are certain threshold. If the loan is over that threshold, then that compliance or a bare minimum compliance is mandatory. If it's not, if the loan is less than that threshold, so they can still go through that, but definitely from a risk perspective, when bank will be doing a pricing, that pricing will definitely going to be on a higher side, because bank price the risk for that loan. So if there's a climate risk embedded somewhere and the law, it's less than the threshold, because if there's a total loss, bank can absorb that. That's the whole intent behind it. So as a single transaction, if there's a total loss, bank can absorb it. So that's the whole criteria, while how much risk bank can go for. Then from a private equity perspective, there's already mandates within the private equity that they have to look from a climate risk perspective. It's not about that whether they want to promote ESG or not, but it's more from a risk perspective, whether they are going in an investment. Now, the climate is climate risk is a financial risk, or social risk is a financial risk. We have seen something like in the case of floods, or in case of the wildfire in the US, we have seen the insurance companies and the banks going bankrupt just because they are unable to handle the claims, or the losses were so high, the banks were unable to absorb that. They never priced that risk, and they never denied those loans or investment in those regions which were prone to floods at that time. So that's what the central banks are asking. Do the stress testing, not only for yourself, but your portfolio, to understand the investment which are prone to either a physical risk or a transition risk. Like anybody who's investing in coal right now, they know that there's a phase out plan, and there will be a certain time that plant will not be operative, whether that investment will have an opportunity to recover all the loans and the interest or the profit from that, or the timelines are such that there is a risk that banks are unable to recover it.
Anything,
And
Aleem,
just to
you wanted to add? Yeah, please.
Yeah, just to add a procedural detail related to the answer, as Shahir mentioned in his comment as well, that the KYC stage is going to be critical. So the ESRM that we were talking about earlier, the Environmental and Social Risk Management Framework, it has already incorporated in the bank system. It has mandated incorporating in the bank system the environmental and social due diligence at the time of credit screening. So it is very important that the credit screening incorporates all these factors. So banks have incorporated those policies in their systems. So the credit rating system already, the rigor with which that information is gathered and the decisions are impacted, that rigor will increase with the passage of time. And as Sajid said, there is going to be a spectrum that on one end there'll be a denial, but on the other hand there'll be good rates and benefits to the companies which are compliant, which are more responsible entities, both in terms of their practices and the availability of information for the banks.
Right, thank you, Aleem. Shay, you wanted to add something on top of this?
Yeah, just to add that everything that needs to be concluded should have to be into an automated manner, so that there should be less human intervention and more automated results, so that the bank data, because there are a lot of customers and there are a lot of clients, so data can be seen, viewed at a bigger scale, so that everything can be managed in a proper manner. So just like Sajid Saab said, that banks act as a pivot for the whole economy. So whatever going through the bank as a traffic can be better monitored in comparison to if we try to implement through other or institutions or the sectors.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Shahir, for that. Just one quick comment regarding some of the questions that are coming from various other industries and SMEs. One of the partners in today's webinar is University of Lahore and Continuum. We've already conducted some specific sessions on textile industry. There are 2 questions from textile industry, so I'd request you guys to please refer to those recordings that are already available. And regarding some generic SMEs related question, I think we'll try and ask those questions off the record, because if we get into those questions, we'll move away from the core focus, which is the banking sector. Gentlemen, we have 5 minutes left, so I'll ask one last question from all of you. So there are a lot of people who have joined us today from the banking industry and financial sector in specific, and they represent various scales in their and hierarchies in their own organizations. So what are 1 or 2 things you want them to take back to their organization? Like, what are the things they need to be ready for? What is the conversation that they need to pick up? What is the readiness they need to assure? So Sajid, we can take it to you first, and then Aleem, and then Shahid, we can come back to you.
I think if you look at there's an interesting question, so I'll just pick that one, the IMF related. So I think it's not only the IMF which is talking about the incorporating the climate resilience part within the overall economy, and that is not only from a public sector perspective, but also from a private sector and the banking and the regulator perspective. So all the development agencies and the supra-regulator, I would use the term, which are regulators of the central bank globally. So if you put it together, everybody is talking about incorporating a climate resilience or a climate risk management within their decision making. And any project they are going to fund, because that's access to capital, whether it's for government or to private sector, that will require that every project need to be evaluated based on the environment and the social elements together. Even the carbon credits are now does not carry a good value if we are unable to reflect the co-benefit, which is a social benefit, which is associated with that carbon credit, and then the use of that proceeds subsequently ensuring that it's not going into the the environment where the environment risk or further generating a carbon footprint on that side. So I think that's an important thing to understand. It's no more a boardroom conversation. It's basically we are talking about a direct access to capital. Whether it's going to happen overnight, the answer is no. It will happen. It's not the if question, it's just the timeline, because the transition is the process, normally how it works. And if you look at the overall liquidity scenario within the Middle East, or we talk about Pakistan, liquidity is a certain question mark right now. The liquid assets are not available, and the banks are also struggling in terms of liquidity. So that's mean everybody as a global capital flow system, whether it's coming from a family offices, private equity, or a large organization in the other part of the world, everybody is looking for a certain verified information that where those funds are going to be deployed. And particularly if we are talking about the Nordic region and the large sovereign funds, they are very particular in terms of that the funds which they are putting in any economy, that should not be increasing the capital footprint. There has to be a very clear path for net zero, regardless of whether it's 2060 or 2050 or 2070, but there has to be a very credible path backed by a proper MRV system, having a proper governance at a public sector level, and the organizations which are involved there, whether it's coming from a private sector, it has to be a part of the governance as well as strategy and the risk management for those organizations. So again, globally, whenever we have to drive a change within the economy, the bank is the one of a lever. We have seen in EU, when they come up with a green financial instrument and the definition with SFDR and everything, so they started with the banking institutions, and they created the second part, how the businesses will be reporting. So I think that's a two end of that. The one, how the business and the public sector is going to report their information, and how the banks are going to absorb that. So, and then do the risk evaluation, because any default within the bank, just because of a transition or physical risk, that's a risk for the entire economy. And in some cases, they are so big that it's a risk for the global economy or a regional economy for that matter. So again, I go back to my fundamental principle. It's not about the cost you are going to incur today as a bank. Bank can afford that, but what they can't afford is exposure, which end up creating a default or a call for equity, which is so large in terms of quantum that it dry up the rest of the economic activity, and there will be no funds which are available to other businesses.
So Sajid, as you close this remark, while the term sustainability is a nice and is a broad terminology, in many cases it is not a matter of sustainability alone, it's a matter of survival. So
Yeah.
so we have to look at things with that lens, and nothing related to climate or any indicator related to sustainability is without a target. We talk about the global targets of net zero or managing the pre-industrial rate temperatures. So everything starts with the target. So the closing messages for the financial institutions or for other organization is, look at where you are today, assess your current state, and set yourself targets and start working towards them. Without starting the journey, you're not going to reach at the destination, and remain connected to this conviction that following these initiatives that are related to climate, you're not just doing good for your organization, you're doing good for the society, you're doing something good for the world, for this planet. So this conviction will make whatever you're doing as part of your corporate responsibility a personal responsibility as well.
Definitely.
Very rightly said. I'll steal something Sajid mentioned in one of the IFC and WWF run events presentation, there was a big question written over there on the slide that said that it wasn't a question, it was a statement that every single person sitting in this room is affected directly or indirectly by the climate itself. So it's so close to the house that, you know, when Ali mentioned that you're not just doing it for your organization or the compliance or the regulatory requirement, you're also doing it for this generation, your own self and your next generation. Thank you, Alim, for that. Shahid, you wanted
Yes.
to add something on that?
Just one last point from my perspective. If I have to comply with the ESG requirement, I would start from the need rather than the want. So what is required in my compliance requirement, I will start from there and try to gather the basic data for like what is the carbon emission requirement, what is the utility consumption report that tells me, and how it is linked with the compliance requirement. So gradually, so for my perspective, this is the only thing that from where I will start and gradually meet up to the S1, S2 requirements. So this is my side.
Done. Thank you, Shaggy. Thank you very much for that. Sajid, I know you already pick up that IMF question. Did you want to add something regarding specifically when I said if you want to give a direction to people representing financial services or banking industry, like what are the immediate next steps they need to take when they go back to their offices, not tomorrow, but on Monday?
I think my experience says that it starts with the capacity building. So you have to really start working on that to understand the law and the requirement first, rather than treating it as an alien, which need to be done by someone else, because there's an entire organization which need to get involved. My experience is that as soon as you start talking about the capacity building, understanding the issues properly, you will figure it out. The transition is not as complicated as normally we see it, just because it's using a different lingo and the terminology. It's a simple risk management from a banking perspective we are talking about. It's a risk management. There's a new risk which we need to quantify and evaluate. It required the similar governance. It's required the similar rigor. It's required a similar risk management. It's required a similar metrics progress and metrics tracking, as well as setting the target. But understanding those things better will help you to lower your fear, let me say that, and at the same time you build that capacity. And my again second experience is that we talk about data most of the time. When you start navigating, there's a one form or other the data does exist within the organization, whether within the bank or clients. It's just that they are using a different term for that information, or it may be in a raw form or a work in progress side, which require a little bit more calculation to get it into the right form, which can be deployed for the risk assessment. So it's not complicated. It's just the new thing which is evolving. Just like, again, from a banking sector, when IFRS 9 was introduced or Basel was introduced, at the same time, there was a lot of new terminology within the risk management side of it. But over the period, we have seen it's no more something which is an alien thing. It's an everyday discussion, and the entire organization understand that how to do that. It's the same thing for these new regulations within the banking sector, and it's a different risk, but definitely this risk has got a huge impact side of it. So that's again, like I steal the word which Alim used. So it's not about the sustainability compliance; it's the survival. So that's what we are talking about.
Thank you very much, Sajid. Because we are a little running over time also, I'd just like to thank everyone who has joined us for this session today, and to NETS International Sustainability, University of Lahore under the Continuum Project for organizing this conversation. मुझे usually लगता है कि 1 hour webinar is already a stretch, but keeping in view the conversation and the engagement that was coming through, maybe next sessions we could plan 1.5 hour session so we can, cover the whole dynamics of the industry in much depth. But thank you once again, Alim, Sajid, and Shahid, for your time today and for sharing your perspective. I hope everybody enjoyed the conversation today. Just a quick reminder, the session's recording will be available and it will be circulated to all of you later on also. Stay connected with all the panelists that we have, and these organizations will be coming back with many more sessions like these. Thank you. Have a great evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.